Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Azure podcast. My name's Evan Baslick. I'm here with my co-host Russell Young. Everybody else is off. Well, I'd say they're enjoying the nice weather, but at least for me, it's pouring rain all week out here. But they're off doing other things today. But we are joined by a couple of special guests from Pure Storage. We'll get to them in just a couple of minutes. We are recording. This is episode number 516, and we are recording this on May 14th. And with that, Russell, you want to go into some of your news?
Yeah, thanks, Evan. The first one that I spotted was the general availability of a service called Azure Storage Actions, which I hadn't come across before, but they were in public preview only since February. So Azure Storage Actions it's a fully managed service, so no need to stand up infrastructure and VMs and stuff. So fully serverless, works across blob storage and Azure Data Lake storage, and it's all about managing storage objects across multiple storage accounts at scale with no code at all. So you can go into the portal, you can define some conditions and some actions, and you can use this for various different scenarios. So things like cost optimization, data protection, rehydration of files from archiving, tagging, or just reporting on files that may meet certain criteria. So you might be looking for things with certain extensions over a certain size, or files that haven't been looked at for a long time. So I thought that's quite an interesting one. So that's just gone GA. Along with that, I did spot a whole load of features to Azure Files. So that's quite a bit of a refresh update. And there's quite a lot of performance enhancements in there, specifically around metadata processing with the implementation of some caching, and some improvements in Azure File Sync. Like, for example, it supports managed identities now as well. So a couple of good ones to look at there if you're needing some help with your IT ops.
Nice. Yeah, the two that caught my attention, one is we GA'd the flexible orchestration capabilities, and this, around using an instance mix, right? So flexible orchestration is this new orchestration model where you can have VMs and VMSS all in the same VMSS pool, but now you can do different size VMs. So we're really sort of shifting everything into this new orchestration and just sort of replicating all the capabilities. But you get, again, just like a normal VMSS, you get the ability to do auto updates and rolling patches and all that kind of stuff, which is super convenient, relative to just managing all these machines one by one. The other thing is a new Azure SQL trigger for functions, right? So something goes on inside SQL, and that'll trigger a function app, just sort of bringing the integration together on this one. And I think this one's probably from Sajid, but there's some new the new O3 and O4 mini models are now available in Azure AI Foundry, as well as some additional agent workflows. And I'm not even going to try and talk to that stuff. I'm not deep enough in that stuff yet. We'll do a follow up on that one.
There's quite a few announcements in that area actually, Evan. So if people are interested, there's a lot about some new models, some fine tuning capabilities that have now been released as well, and agent to agent communication as well. So orchestration.
And next week, what is it? Next week is build, so I'm sure there's going to be a
Precisely.
slew of stuff next week.
Yeah. So we'll have a good update on all the from build, I guess, in a week's time.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, cool. Well, great. Well, no, with that, let's get over to our friends from Pure Storage. So we got Vaclav. You were here, I don't know, 4 or 5 months ago, talking about some of your products. David, you've not been on the show before, but if you all could introduce yourselves and tell us what you do over at, gonna make sure I say this right, not at Microsoft, but at Pure.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I will get started. So hello, thanks for invitation again. So my name is Vaclav Jirovsky. I have been working at Pure Storage for I'm getting close to second year, and I'm also Microsoft MVP in Azure area, and I have some background at Microsoft where I used to be a CSA, and right now.
I don't know that I knew that. I don't. Yeah. We'll have to follow up on that. Okay, I'm sure we cross paths at some point. Okay.
Absolutely, and I'm helping at Pure Storage to make our customers successful on their public cloud journey. David?
Cool. So David Stamen, been here at Pure roughly about 5 years. Started off as a solution architect focused on virtualization, and I've kind of expanded my reach into our virtualization and cloud. So right now, my role is leading our technical strategy for our cloud and virtualization. So it's really making sure our products are successful and becoming that interlock between our field, our customers, our partners, our alliances. And so working with folks like Microsoft is a really key point to being able to grow our product and build those relationships.
Yeah, and David, you and I were talking before. I think you and I had both forgotten, but you and I have run into each other with a couple of mutual customers, right? Just both working to try and make them successful, right, on the shared platform. So yeah, it's a super. I find it a fun area personally for those kind of integrations, right? If you're not pushing for good stuff, nothing breaks, right? Easy stuff just works, hard stuff breaks. So we had y'all on, a little while ago to talk about Block Store, Cloud Block Store. Why don't we start with just a real brief reminder for everybody of what that is, and then y'all have some really big announcements recently about better integration with Azure. Maybe we'll go into that after that.
Yeah. So
Please go
I
ahead.
think the best part around that is if you think about Cloud Block Store, it's kind of the offering we've had available for roughly about 5 years now,
And it started on-prem, right? Originally, it was an on-premise.
Yeah. And so if you really think about Pure from its cores, a lot of people think we're a hardware company. I like to think at heart that we're a software company because over time we've moved across a bunch of different hardware. But really the core of what we do is our operating system called Purity. And so we took what we've essentially had on premises, all of those core features and benefits and use cases, and brought that to the public cloud. However, instead of utilizing our own storage and our arrays, we've actually built it on top of native Azure compute and storage. And so really what it does is it provides a lot more enterprise class features, but also a very familiar interface to our customers. And so it leads to things such as like our best in class snapshots, deduplication, compression, replication, encryption, et cetera. And really provides a lot of those benefits to customers. And I think we've seen a lot of strong use cases there, primarily around databases, test dev use cases, as well as Azure VMware solution. And so I think the core point of that is that that solution has been here for a while, but there's always ways that we can improve that service. And I want to say, Vaclav, it was about 2 years ago that we started to work with Microsoft on this Azure native service, which we're calling Pure Storage Cloud. And that's kind of what we're here to talk about today. And how do we take what we've had that was already good and continue to innovate it and make it a whole lot better? So Vaclav, you kind of want to lead that off of sort of what what Pure Storage Cloud looks like today?
Yeah, sure. So this is our new service. It's what I like to call it, like it's a managed block storage as a service. So it's really a true genuine Azure service, which it has own resource provider, and we have been working with Microsoft. You mentioned over almost 2 years. And I was close to this development, and it was really hard for me, or it gave me insights into all challenges product teams at Microsoft need to solve to introduce a new Azure service, new Azure managed service. It's so many tasks you need to do, so many challenges you need to focus. I can share many details, but for example, you need to integrate like Azure Monitor that doesn't come out of the box, like you need to develop some integration. So these folks at the product groups earn even more of my respect, I would say, because their work
Don't
is...
tell them that. Don't tell them that. We don't want them to know that.
Okay. And so this service recently entered a public preview. So our first supported initial scenario supported is to act as an external storage provider for Azure VMware solution, which sometimes we hear from customers that when they want to switch, when they want to migrate their VMware from on-premises to Azure, they are usually blocked due to storage needs, storage requirements, because AVS, the native vSAN storage option within AVS, comes with some capacity coming with nodes. And in case you need more capacity, you need to scale out, you need to add more nodes. which when you don't utilize the compute can be really costly, and you are over provisioning your ADS. So that's the reason why the external storage makes absolutely sense. And also, besides, it brings also the enterprise features David mentioned before. And yeah, please go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say before we get too far, because I think you sort of threw it out there, but I don't know that people would necessarily get sort of the huge distinction between the old model of your deployment, right, versus this new one. When you say native, help me understand sort of what old looked like, which I think was just a bunch of VMs in a customer's subscription.
Yeah,
right. To now, like, does it look more like, it looks to me as a user like it looks like Azure Storage would, or Azure SQL would, like it just shows up in the portal as a resource, and I don't have to manage the VMs. I don't have to do anything. Is that sort of what you're talking about when you mean native?
I want to, yeah, exactly. This what I wanted to proceed with. Like that's the no, thank you. You reminded me. Like this is the more important now to mention. So the CBS, the distribution model for pure cloud block store, is like it's a managed app on Azure Marketplace. So it works like when customer selected they want to deploy a CBS into their subscription, it worked like it deployed a managed resource group with the definition, with the ARM template, defining the VMs, Azure disks, etc., all the underlying resources. And it was within the storage, but we sometimes, or more often, I need to admit it, we were receiving a feedback that it's really complex to deploy CBS into the subscription. So the Azure native pure storage service is something totally. I mean, from the user experience, it's much seamless, something totally different, because inside the Azure portal you see it as another service. Like you have the Cosmos DB, you have the SQL Server, and you have their new resource provider underlying. In Azure portal, you have the service itself. And maybe, David, do you want to describe a little bit more how the resources look like in the service?
Yeah, and I think the key point is that necessarily the deployment isn't complex. The problem is I would almost say it's like trying to fit a square peg through a round hole, is that we have our service that when everything's deployed, okay, it deploys perfect. But every single customer's environment is different and has different policies.
Yeah.
And so there's things that we do at the product level, because we're entirely software, that we can adapt. For example, if Cosmos DB or if Cosmos DB is unavailable, we've now migrated to use something like storage accounts. But a lot of times customers are like, well, I can't use Key Vault, or I can't use this service, or I can't deploy this in our tenant. And so while the old solution was easy, there was kind of three main operations. It was deploying the Cloud Block Store solution and then actually doing the connection through run commands. But what we've done with the Azure native service is it's, as Vaclav mentioned, it's all native, which means that you don't actually need to know Pure. What actually happens is you go to the Azure Marketplace and say, I want to deploy the Azure native Pure Storage Cloud service. And at that point, we ask you two questions. We ask you, what region do you want to deploy this to? And what is your consumption model? Is it monthly, 1 year, 3 year? And I think that's really the big differentiation around the older model, where you actually had a license and then you had the underlying infrastructure. So you kind of had to manage two distinct costs. With the native solution, you actually get a single cost from a single bill that's deployed directly through Microsoft and goes against any type of committed spend that you have with your Mac agreements. And so I think the key point of that is the Azure native service has, I would say, two main distinct components. One is that service that you pick a region and you pick your consumption. And then once it's there, you deploy storage pools. And it's very easy because you don't really need to think about sizing of what model, what hardware, what are all these things under the covers. Is you say, how much performance do you need, right? It's a slider from 800 megabytes to 2 gigs per second for now. And then from a capacity perspective, it kind of grows automatically as needed. So you don't need to make any decisions up front outside of what those performance things actually are.
So I'm just trying to get my head around how it's kind of abstracted away from the underlying storage. Do you install your service and then do you expose file shares from it or drives that can be mounted? How does that interface to the other solution work? So if I want to consume your storage rather than Azure native storage, how does that work? What is there the REST APIs that I can talk to it with as per blob storage or something like that, or is that all totally different?
Yes, so in CBS, you can connect, you can mount your native VM, standard Azure VM, through iSCSI, or you can also connect it through run commands, as David mentioned, with your AVS SDDC. What the Azure native Pure Storage service comes with, it's like a more seamless integration. We really focused on the user experience. So once you create the AVS and you create the Pure Storage Cloud and the storage pool within the service, you just hit the button Connect AVS. You will select the resource, and it will provision everything under the hood. Everything will be made in background. And what it also does, it installs our plugin into your vSphere client. So any storage operation, any storage management you need to do, you can do automatically. You can do out of the vSphere plugin. You don't need to switch to another console or anything, and you can do it directly from the vSphere.
Yeah, I mean, and I think sorry, Evan.
Yeah,
but
go ahead,
I think to kind of also address Russell your question, I think one of the things that really differentiates the service is that as it being an Azure native service, all of the components are truly as a managed service. So nothing is actually deployed in a customer tenant. We actually use a really, really cool technology within Microsoft called VNet injection. And so what happens is that a customer will take a subnet and they will subscribe or will add in the pure storage.block service. And essentially what happens is we inject the storage endpoint into the customer subscription where they access it securely. So think about it as a free-ish private endpoint that requires no configuration at all. That's done in a very low latency, high throughput manner. That is really the easiest and best way to kind of handle some of these traffic.
I mean, this really, I mean, I don't, like, certainly you all have a bunch of enterprise features, so don't want to downplay those in any way, shape, or form. But if I think about what you're describing, in my head, I sort of think about it again, really analogous to the Azure storage product, where absolutely we Microsoft have to manage a whole bunch of software and hardware components. We got infrastructure we got to deploy, and all of that. It is a full-time job managing and maintaining and running that. But customers, all they have to do is say, hey, I want a blob storage account or I want a disk, and we just handle that for them. And most of the time we do it right. We have our problems for sure, but generally it's just handled for the customer. If I look at the old CBS, I had to deploy some VMs. I had to manage those. I had to sort of make sure that was working, and I had to make sure my network security groups were right. All that complexity that comes with a VM. With your native solution, it sounds like you're a lot closer, or maybe almost identical, right, to the model of storage. If I just want a cloud block storage resource, I don't know or care what you Pure are doing under the covers to manage it. I mean, y'all could be running around with a bunch of hamster wheels, right? Like, sort of not my problem as a customer. And ultimately, I think it sounds like the value proposition is the people who know how to run CBS best is y'all, right?
Exactly.
Like, you're running it.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, is that the right way to think about that?
It's absolutely right thinking about that. Like, I would like to also mention in CBS we have HA, and we have also like let's say some architecture pattern how to do upgrades even without non-disruptive. So you should not experience any downtime with CBS during for upgrade or for capacity expansion. There is no need for that. Like, if this happens, it's really something bad, and it should not happen. So that's the CBS, and in Pure and the native service, we are getting closer. Like, we do it, like our engineers do it, our SRE team works. We operate 24/7, same as Microsoft. So if there is any trouble or anything, our engineers will start to dig in what is wrong and fix it for you. So you will just focus on, I'm consuming the block storage. I have this capacity, I have this performance, and that's where your where your issues ends.
Yeah, and that's great because in essence you've moved some of that admin headache and management to you as the provider, right, versus the customer. But I suspect, right, getting into that native integration, I'm sure you ran into some challenges as you were going through and doing it. Did y'all have to rethink anything about sort of the way that you were built or deploy? Like any lessons learned for other people that are trying to, because you're functionally just building a service on Azure, right? But any lessons that you would want somebody else who is heading down this path to take away from that, experience?
Absolutely. Like there are so many architecture discussions we had. It's hard when you ask me right now. I cannot remember any one of them, any particular, but there were thousands of them. And I know, for example, you need to focus on the operation of the platform. I mean, you are developing some platform with some control plane, which controls the service. So how such control plane looks like? Is it regional? How it looks? There were so
that's right. You had to design like all the management plane, all that had to be redesigned for this new world. Yeah. This is not just a port. Like this is functionally brand new in a lot of places for you. Okay.
So maybe David, do you remember any such particular discussion? Like when you ask me right now, I cannot remember. If I will disconnect from this call and I will know immediately 20 of them. But
I'm just really curious on this because I hadn't really given it a lot of thought before. But when, as a developer, if you're working with a third party, normally they go out of their way to provide you with documentation, SDKs, quick starts, all that kind of. Is there any of that when you're doing a native Azure service? Do they give you any kind of onboarding experience and documentation? Is it kind of just come work with us and just soak it up for a bit?
I think it's all of the above because you kind of have to think about when we're building the service is, as Vaclav mentioned earlier on, we're essentially creating a pure storage resource provider within Azure. And we're now integrating with other resource providers. So it's even though we're working with Azure VMware solution today, there's actually the component that actually supports the Azure native integrations. And so we kind of have, I don't know if the right term is a three-way handshake, but we essentially have to work with different parties. And I think one of the biggest things we've learned is that there's deliverables throughout this entire process where things can just pop up that could be holiday change freezes or security vulnerabilities or even natural disasters that we don't really take into account some of this, and development just could stop for a little bit. Or we now have to say we had a straight line and we have this approach and now all of a sudden we have to change this. So it's kind of to that approach, right, where you always take into that account and add more time, but there's always these unknowns. And some of these things could actually be outside of your control. But in the end, while it might take a little bit longer, you're eventually developing and providing a much more stable, innovative product to be able to kind of delay it to get the right features out.
This part is really fascinating to me because, again, I wasn't thinking about it in this vein until y'all started talking about it. But really, you moved from a world, and it's the same journey that we've been on the Microsoft side of. You used to write code, you ship the code, you go have a release party, and then you start shipping fixes, right? And you have customer cases coming in, or whatever. But really, to some degree, unless the customer calls you saying, "I have a problem," not that you don't have anything to do, but like you're not really running it day in, day out. You're building the next version of your software. Now you have this real-time 24/7 service that you have to maintain and keep running. And there's just a baseline level of, piece of hardware fails or, you hit, some edge case you never thought of, and now that causes some failure in the service. Like you've got to now manage and do that stuff. You now have a DevOps world that you're running and managing now, which is, that's a whole new world if you've not lived in that previously.
And for me, personally, I'm fine with the developing. I had expectations about developing such. What was more for me, expanding my viewpoint was the processes. You need to establish, like, for example, support processes, because the support needs to work. It's integration between Microsoft and Pure Storage. And both supports need to be available to do when such issue happens or anything. You need to establish some processes. It was really expanding my knowledge. Like, I was not counting with this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well,
David, sorry, I interrupt you.
Yeah. No, it's okay. So I think the other key point that sort of aligns to the previous conversation, and kind of some future, is that I think both Microsoft during this process learned a lot around Pure and expectations that we've kind of built into our core principles, as well as Pure has learned from a Microsoft perspective what are some of the things that kind of happen there. But to the point where we have DevOps and SREs monitoring for failures and stuff, is I think the important thing is that when we think about this, a lot of this is around the modernization of our
Yeah,
solution being software, is we're running
absolutely.
on top of the Azure compute and storage, which means we can architect around that. So we've already had two different generations of our products where we've
Just
increased stuff.
released.
Yeah, well, it's been 5 years, right? And now we have a
Oh,
third
oh,
one that
oh!
we're
You're
coming
talking from
here.
the original. Okay,
Yeah.
not the
And so
native
as you
solution.
guys are looking at innovating with things like Azure Boost, right? As we're
Yeah,
looking at the introduction of NVMe backends and all of these other really cool technologies that are coming from Microsoft, we can just adopt those. And the
yeah.
benefit there of it being a service is we're now passing along all the benefits to our customers, making the solution they're already using faster and cheaper. And I think that being completely transparent to the customer is really a huge value that we have the ability to bring here.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, I think y'all really hit on, like I said, I wasn't thinking about this in the sense, but this journey that y'all went on and the one that you're continuing to be on, that is the one that I see customers struggle with a little bit as they go, right? Because they're used to sort of owning all the pieces and they may ship code, right? ISVs specifically, software vendors, they ship code, but now if you're running a service, the world is different, right? You got to have a 24/7 on call. You got to have the ability to get all the data. You got to talk about your data. How do you get access to the platform data, right? All that kind of stuff you got to work out. That historically it was, it was a much different experience. Well, no, this is great, y'all. I really appreciate y'all coming on. Any last thoughts you want to leave the audience with around your product?
I think just at a high level, as Vaclav mentioned earlier, we're in public preview for Azure VMware Solution. So again, we're excited about this. We always appreciate any sort of feedback from either our partners or our customers out there. So we're available. You can always reach out to us on LinkedIn, on X, and kind of all those
Well, yeah,
mediums
we should drop
in
those
this
links in the show
scenario.
notes for everybody so that if they got a direct path they can reach out to you. We'll capture those.
Yeah,
Great.
definitely. I
Well,
really
awesome.
appreciate the time. It was a really good conversation.
Yeah, no, this is great. It's I like I always like hearing about the journeys that people take because it's neat to see that as you learn something new, it's shipping software is not just shipping software anymore, right? There's a platform underneath.
Just one last quick one from me before we wrap up. And I guess this is it for you, David. Just, earlier on you mentioned the use case or the scenario where you need to scale your storage nodes if you're not using Pure Store and your products. Are there any other kind of obvious scenarios where a customer is going to come across some kind of challenge or issue or problem, or they'll have some need, or they'll get some extra particular benefit by using your products that should kind of just trigger in their mind and go, okay, what I could do with your product to solve this particular challenge?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing with our solution is that our performance and capacity scale completely independent. And so even if you have needs where you need high performance at low capacities or even high performance at higher capacities, that's a use case. But I think
Right.
a core value of what our product really does is like copy data management. So things like databases and that data reduction, where customers might have a test dev system and then they're cloning it, or their production, they're cloning it for test dev, UAT staging. And so now they're able to make all of these copies of their environments within seconds. And they're actually only storing that data once. So there's a huge reduction in the data, but also a huge decrease in the actual operational cost of being able to do all of that as well.
Cool. Thank you.
Great, awesome. Well, thank you all again for coming on. We'll have you all back on in 6 months, and you can tell us, about how this service has continued to evolve as well. But thanks again, appreciate it. Great. Well, y'all, thanks for coming. Talk to y'all later. Bye now.
Thanks for the
Thank you.
invitation. Bye.